In today's episode of Today in World War II, March 9th, things are going from bad to worse in Viipuri on the Karelian Isthmus of Finland. The Germans bomb Buckingham Palace. Rommel leaves his command in Tunisia, North Africa for health reasons. Okay. And the United States Air Force firebombs Tokyo. Let's get to work. Okay, so on March 9th, 1940, the Soviets' offensive on the Karelian Isthmus is getting tighter and tighter, drawing the noose tighter and tighter against the Finns. They are right now, the last week or so, they have been driving in a manner that they know they're going to take Viipuri. Today, they captured the village of Tali on the outskirts of Viipuri. For the most parts, they completely controlled the Bay of Viipuri. Viipuri was, for all intents and purposes, surrounded. Remember, they don't control open the Gulf of Viipuri because this is still winter. The tanks and the trucks and troops can move very freely over the ice. So they, for all intents and purposes, had surrounded Viipuri. They had flanked it in the Gulf of Finland. They had taken the islands in there. They had taken the coastal batteries, and it got so bad that the Finnish field marshal in charge of the entire Finnish armed forces, Mannerheim, had suggested to his government that surrender might be the only option at this stage. Thankfully, that didn't happen for the Finns, but that's how dire things were getting. On March 9th, 1941, German aircraft bombed London and they also damaged Buckingham Palace. There's some very famous photos of King George and his wife, Queen Elizabeth, and there surveying the damage after the bombing. This was just part of the Blitz, right? Ever since fall of 1940, when the Germans realized they could not beat the RAF in daylight raids, it was too expensive in terms of casualties and losses for them to keep bombing in daylight. So they just switched to night bombing, which is what the RAF was going to do. It was already doing, in fact, against German cities. So you know, the U.S. 8th Air Force and the 15th Air Force later in the South, they were the only ones that kept beating their head against the wall to continue to do daylight bombing. And eventually we were able to perfect it because of the P-51 Mustang, as we talked about that previously. So in any case, there's just more collateral damage, more German bombing of civilian areas, more civilians getting killed, more damage being done, and Germany sowing, and within a couple of years, they're going to start reaping what they sowed here by all the night bombing, all this targeting civilians is going to come at them 1,000 times more when the RAF and the U.S. Air Force start bombing their cities into the Stone Age. And on March 9th, 1943, it's all over but the shouting in North Africa and Tunisia. Rommel was a nervous wreck. I don't know if he had hepatitis or jaundice. He had something wrong with him, but he certainly had the justification for leaving for health reasons. But I think a lot of it was the high command of Hitler did not want their golden boy to be humiliated by having to surrender to the Allies. So they brought him away and had a face-saving explanation that he was being withdrawn for health reasons. And I think the reasons were more Montgomery, Patton, and all the Commonwealth armed troops that were there. And by Bizerte and the capital of Tunisia, they were going to go bye-bye real soon. In March 9th, 1945, the first major firebombing against Tokyo happened. As I mentioned in a previous video, General Lee May was given command of the U.S. Air Force operating out of the Mariana Islands, the B-29s, and he realized that, look, guys, daylight bombing is not going to work against the Japanese. This is not Germany. We're going to have to just take a page from the RAF, and we're going to firebomb them. Most of the Japanese cities were made of wood, so they were flammable like you wouldn't believe. So on today's date, March 9th and into overnight into March 10th, it's called Operation Meeting House. About 279 B-29s dropped incendiary bombs over Tokyo. They destroyed approximately 267,000 buildings or homes, or roughly 400 square kilometers of the city. Americans estimate that the Japanese suffered about 88,000 killed, about 41,000 approximately injured, and 1 million were left homeless. Now, the Japanese, the Tokyo Fire Department estimated about 97,000 were killed and about 125,000 were wounded. I tell you what, if you look strictly at the casualties and you look at how many civilians were killed on these fire bombings, and it wasn't just Tokyo, it was the major cities in Japan at this stage of the war when we're trying to destroy their industry, we're trying to break their morale, we're trying to convince them to surrender because by this point in time we knew that they were going to fight to the end and that was going to cause us estimated over 1 million casualties to take Japan. If you compare the casualty rates and the amounts of the firebombing and what they were for the atomic bombs, the firebombs killed more people than the atomic bombs. Okay. So think about that. You don't hear any moral outrage about the firebombing of Japanese cities. You don't hear that too much, but you hear just lots of hand wringing about the atomic bombs being dropped. Let me ask you this. Which caused them to surrender, the fire bombings or the atomic bombs? Okay. They weren't surrendering after the fire bombings. So just keep that in mind. We saved a lot of American soldiers and sailors and Marines' lives and pilots because of that. Thank you very much for watching. I appreciate it. And I can't wait to talk to you tomorrow.